Where does one begin, aside from saying that I'm obviously not originally from around here? My name is Peter Romery. I'm Director of Student Legal Services. Over there is Dawn Gibbs, who is a paralegal with Student Legal Services. And we are an advisory service here on campus, a consultative service for students. We can advise you, we can't represent you, and anything that you tell us is going to be absolutely confidential. Now, one of the small caveats that we have with regards to advising obviously comes in when it comes to landlord-tenant and its roommate issues. I'm going to get onto that in a short while. And then Dawn will also talk to you, though, about the availability of a mediation service that we have, just that's available because we cannot advise student versus student. So if there's a roommate issue, Dawn will explain to you a little bit about what we do there, what's available in the service that she runs within Student Legal Services. A lease is typically going to be the first major contract that you enter into. And one of my favorite phrases is this, and I will, because it's being memorialized on video, keep my language absolutely as clean as I possibly can. My grandmother was Scottish, and she had the ability to cuss like a sailor. And so I grew up believing that I should use, and try to use, every word contained in the Oxford English Dictionary. And so whenever I go out, if people say, oh my goodness, you use profanity, I say, I promise you, it is a word that's contained in the Oxford English Dictionary. But what I'm trying to get at here is that there are folks who will talk to you about wait until you get out into the real world. You were born in the real world. This is not Avatar. And the decisions that you make and the obligations that you take upon yourself are going to be binding on you. This is not happening in the abstract. If you sign a contract, that contract is going to be binding on you. If you break the law, then there will be consequences to the breaking of the law. And I don't mean to say that in any way to sound condescending, but I think sometimes when people say to you, wait until you get out into the real world, they're perhaps missing the plot just a little bit. You're perhaps more in the real world than many of them are. The other thing that I want to say to you is this, is that you must not let emotion govern anything to do with the signing of a contract. I had a wonderful discussion with somebody today where I said one of the things with the lawyers that we appear as lawyers to be relatively emotionless individuals. We've got to deal with things very much in the black and white. We've got to deal with things very much in a non-emotional state. What do I mean by that? You go and see an apartment complex and you absolutely fall in love with it. You think this place is absolutely fantastic. Or you have a friend who is living in an apartment complex and says, come and live with me. And you say, you know what, I'm going to let the friendship rule here. And then you sign a contract, and typically that contract is going to be for 1 year. And a couple of days in, you say to yourself, this is not the choice that I should have made. You've got to deal with things in a very structured way. And hopefully what we're going to show for you, or show to you today, is a way to deal with things in a very structured way. Talk about your obligations, a landlord's obligations. And forgive me if that sounds politically incorrect to use landlord and not landlady or landperson, but I'm talking from the North Carolina General Statute and the terminology that they use. But we're going to talk about those obligations and things that you should do. So, as we go forward, make sure my clicker is going in the right way. Obligations. When you sign a lease, remember, it is a binding contract, okay? The second that they get your signature on the dotted line, you are obligated. Their signature is likely already going to be on there. And as soon as two people agree, and I'm even going to talk to you in a couple of moments about not even having a signed contract and you still being bound by a lease. But as soon as you agree, you are under a contract. And so that is going to be a very, very important matter for you. There is no 3-day rescission period. If you go out to buy a vehicle or to lease a vehicle, or even if you're going out to get chiropractic services and you sign up for a long-term contract, They'll tell you, you've got 3 days cooling off period to get out of this. That does not happen with a lease. It is not going to happen, and so you need to make absolutely sure before you go anywhere that you have taken a very good look at the lease. And I'll take a walk through that with you in a second. You're going to have obligations that are imposed on you from 2 sources, and the landlord is going to have obligations that are imposed upon them from a number of sources. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The sources of obligations for you are going to be, 1, that written contract that is in front of you, okay? Number 2 is going to be a statute that is called the Residential Rental Agreements Act. There's no test on this afterwards for you to remember the verbiage, but there's a law that imposes obligations on you, and then the contract imposes obligations on you. As long as what's in the contract doesn't contradict what's in the statute, if you stay with me on this, okay, as long as what's in the contract doesn't contradict what's in the statute, it binds you. So, I'll give you an example. In North Carolina, a landlord can only rent habitable premises to you. You cannot waive that by contract. What do I mean? If I want to go and live in a box alongside a railroad track, I am perfectly free to do that if I want to, and if CSX doesn't have a problem with it, okay? But the second I want to rent that cardboard box to one of you, it has to meet the housing code. And my cardboard box is not going to meet the housing code. It's not going to have running water. It's not going to have heat. It's not going to be something that I can promise you is not going to suffer from infestations with rodents or with fleas. So those aren't habitable premises. And you can't waive that in a lease. So I can't come up to you with a piece of paper and says the law requires that these be habitable premises, but if you just sign this, it doesn't matter whether or not they're habitable. You with me? So I can't contradict what's contained in the law, but I can put oodles of extra stuff on you. The law says nothing, for example, about having a bicycle. It's a Residential Rental Agreements Act. But the landlord can say, you can't keep bicycles on these premises. You sign an agreement to that effect, you can't keep a bicycle on those premises. The law, for example, does not say that you can't host a dinner party after 11 o'clock at night. The landlord can say that too, and they can have you sign something, say, I'm not going to host any parties after 11 o'clock at night, period. It doesn't contradict what's contained in the statute. But the second the landlord says, well, the statute says I've got to provide you with hot and cold running water, but just sign here and then I don't have to, they can't do that. So there are obligations that are imposed on you. Obligations that are imposed on the landlord are going to come from the contract, they're going to come from the statute, they're going to come from city housing codes. Now that is something for you always to remember. City housing codes, and I'll get into this a little bit further, a little bit later on. But if you're in premises and those premises are in a really, really bad condition, if they're run down, if there's an infestation, if the heat doesn't work, and you call Greenville City Code Enforcement, and they come out and they say those premises are not habitable, guess what? Landlord cannot lease those premises anymore. So what happens to the lease? Gone. Because the law says that the landlord can only rent habitable premises. City Code Enforcement comes in and says these aren't habitable premises, tough noogies, because I could use a different word, but tough for the landlord. And so failure to comply with your obligations under the contract, like paying rent, can result in very, very serious consequences. Best example of that I can give you is this. You fail to pay rent, they'll send it to a collection agency. They'll take you to small claims court. They may evict you from the premises. That's going to go on your credit, and that's going to stay with you for a long time. So you want to make sure that you're keeping up with your rental obligations. You're going to make sure that you're not doing something that's going to get you hoofed out of the apartment, because you don't want either a judgment against you or something in collections. These are things that people will come in, they'll chat with us about, and they'll say, well, I can't afford to pay my rent. What's the consequence if I don't? Or I'd rather not pay my rent, or I don't want to pay my rent. You don't pay your rent. Trust me, people will mention that. You don't pay your rent, collection agency, credit problems, court, eviction. Eviction is a judgment that goes on your civil docket, essentially. And then you're going to have a real hard time with your credit score, getting anything by way of credit card or loans for a long time to come. All right, so what do you do before you sign the lease? You've decided, I have had enough of the wonderful hospitality of East Carolina University housing, or I have had enough of the other place where I've been residing, or that box that Peter offered to rent me alongside the railroad track just doesn't seem that appealing to me. So I would like to rent an apartment, or I'd like to rent a house. Some things to think about. First and foremost, and I suggest that this is one of the most important things that you are going to think about while you are here at ECU, while you think about moving out. Do I really know, and do I really like, the people that I am going to lease with? There are a lot of folks, as I say, where they let the heart rule the head. And it may be somebody that you have been friends with since kindergarten, but you've never lived in a confined space with that person. It may be that they are the night owl, okay? They like to throw wild parties and listen to Guns N' Roses. I'm really dating myself there because that was after I got into adulthood that Guns N' Roses came along. But they like to listen to really wild music late into the night. You like to get lots of rest. That's not going to work. It may be that your friend likes to wake and bake every morning. They like the Amsterdam air freshener, the smell of reefer in the morning, okay? You don't want to be living with that person, even though they are your best friend. That can cause problems for you. And these are things that we see that come up. Make sure that you really want to move in with the folks that you're moving in with, because you're going to be with them for at least 12 months. And aside from some very, very limited exceptions, if you have problems with your roommate, the landlord is going to turn around to you and say, I don't care. That's between you and your roommate. Both of you are obligated to pay rent to me. You want to move out? Go ahead and move out, but you've got to keep paying rent, or you've got to find somebody ready, willing and able to take your place on the lease, and I've got to approve them. So make sure that you really know and like the person that you're going to be moving in with. When you go to the apartment complex, ask to see the actual apartment that you are going to be renting. If they say it is not available for you to see right now, that should raise a red flag. If they say there's somebody in there right now, every lease that I have ever seen gives a landlord the right to show the premises or inspect the premises based on reasonable notice. So you say, okay, can I come back in 48 hours and take a look at the unit that you're going to rent to me? The show unit, the model unit that they show to people, that thing is always gorgeous. I lived in a townhouse when I first emigrated. My wife is from Eastern North Carolina. I am not. Either that, I've got a very good speech coach. And we moved into a place in Raleigh, first off, before I went to law school in Chapel Hill. The model home in that apartment complex was absolutely gorgeous. It was spotless. It had this just fantastic furniture in it, smell of potpourri when you walked in through the door. Fantastic. Absolutely great. The pit that we lived in for 3 or 4 months had torn carpet, a dented door. We had a guy next to us who was dealing drugs and liked to listen to very loud music at about 3 o'clock in the morning. Make sure that you get to take a look at the apartment that you're moving into. When we went over to Chapel Hill, we did not make the same mistake twice. Ask to see the actual apartment. Ask, can I afford this apartment? That's very, very important for you. Budget. Make a budget for yourself and make a determination. Am I going to be able to keep up with the payments here? Remember, if you can't pay, that's not going to get you out of the lease. If you can't pay, they're going to sue you for the money that you owe. And if you say, well, let them sue me, it doesn't matter, because they're not going to get anything out of me, they're going to have a judgment against you. And that's going to make life miserable for you when you graduate and you're trying to move forward. Your credit rating is going to be in the toilet, and you're going to be worrying about, where am I going to get finance? Why is this credit card company trying to charge me this astronomical interest rate. Again, with asking to see the actual apartment, check out the neighborhood. Go there at all different hours. Again, something that looks absolutely wonderful during the day may turn into party central at night. Now, that may be where you want to be. That may be what you want to do. It may be that it's not what you want to do. It could be that you are the party animal. And at night, this place is just full of folks who love to study and have chess club meetings out on their porches. You're not going to fit in. They're going to be calling the cops. You'll be getting noise ordinance violations. It could be that the place turns into a teenage skate park on the weekends, okay? Sort of like driving down the main strip here at ECU, where somebody comes out on a skateboard, on an iPod, texting at the same time. And then they wonder why cars are beeping their horns at them. Look at the parking situation. We've had folks, for example, in the college district, people who've moved into the college district. If you move there, you can get a permit to park there from the city of Greenville, right? And those permits are or were designated as A-type permits. And there were folks who thought, well, if I've got an A-type permit from the city of Greenville, I can park in an A lot on ECU. Or if I've got an A permit from ECU, I can park over there. And then Tommy the tow truck driver shows them something different, and they're paying through the nose to get their car back. It may be that you're not able to park in front of the unit. It may be that you're not able to park near the house. So there you go. Again, check out the parking in the neighborhood. Speak with other tenants. Ask them questions. What is the landlord like? What is the apartment complex like? If I put in a request to get something repaired, how long am I going to have to wait? I would normally say to folks, how soon will it get done? But we know the converse is true. How long am I going to have to wait? Is this a safe place to be? Is this somewhere that you would recommend somebody move to? All things for you to consider before you move in. Observe your prospective neighbours. Again, that goes back to some of the things that we've said before. Also, ask the landlord for a copy of the lease that they'll be asking you to sign, along with any addendums, any additions to it, any written rules and regulations that they may have. Because the last thing that you want is to sign a lease, and in that lease you're agreeing to abide by the rules of the complex. And you're thinking to yourself, hey, we're good to go. I've just read through the lease, everything looks good. I'm signing, and then they bring out this huge, great thing and say, by the way, these are the rules and regulations of the complex. And that may include obligations on your part to pay extra money for different things. Make sure that you know about that before you sign the lease. So ask for a copy of everything. And again, our office is available. If you want us to take a look over a lease and say, these are questions you should be asking, are there addendums to this? Do you know what they're referring to when they say here, look at the rules and regulations? We're happy to take a look at that, okay? All right, so you've now decided, all right, I can live with these folks, I'm good to go. The neighborhood is the type of neighborhood I want to be in. This is the type of place where I can park my car. I'm not going to mow somebody down who's listening to their iPod on a skateboard. We're good to go. Now we get to the lease. Okay? There we go. Before you sign the lease, let's see. The lease. First, read the lease in full, including any addendums to the lease. What do I mean by addendums? Those are the nice pieces of paper that they hand to you at the end after you've handed the full lease and say, would you mind signing this? And would you mind signing this? And will you sign this as well? That can range from a tanning bed policy that they may have to you agreeing that if you're going to have a pet in there, you're going to pay extra money. And if you haven't paid that extra money, then they're going to charge you $250 a night for Fido to have stayed with you. It can contain all sorts of things. Bus routes. There are apartment complexes that will charge you an extra fee for the use of a bus. They're paying money to student transit and they're passing on the cost to you. Be aware of that. Ask questions about it. Why is this a charge I've got to pay? Why is this contained in here? What do you mean by this? Okay? It is much better, and I'm not saying that you're being rude, you're being very, very dispassionate and businesslike. It is much better to appear to be somewhat rude than it is to sign on to something and spend the next 12 months thinking, why the hell did I sign that? Never sign a lease with blanks in it. Never, never, never. If it's not applicable, write NA in there, okay? If there is an amount that is meant to be contained in, so I say to them, what is that amount meant to be? I am not suggesting to you that every landlord is going to do something underhanded or nefarious. They're not. But there are some who might. There have been some private landlords, especially in and around Greenville, over the last 20 years, who would take advantage of somebody and who would fill in a blank on a lease. And if you have signed a lease that has blanks in it, and then they later fill those blanks in, how are you going to show that it wasn't in the lease when you signed it? Well, you're going to ask for a copy of the lease, but don't sign anything that's got any type of blank in it, all right? And if it says initial each page, read it through fully, because one of the things that it's going to say at the end, this is one of those beautiful lawyer catch-alls, is that it's going to say in nice bold lettering at the end that I agree that I have read and agree with everything that's contained in here. I've been told of my right to go and have this thing reviewed, etc., etc. And by the time you've signed that, you have completely locked yourself in. Right. When I was talking earlier about oral leases, verbal oral leases, those that are spoken, if I'm able to get my cardboard box nice and deluxe, okay, so now I've got running water, I've got heat, it's good to go, I've got a certificate of occupancy for my cardboard box. And I say to you, I would like to rent this to you for 12 months. And you say, Peter, bargain, done, we're good to go. We now have a lease. Nothing is in writing. Now, you're going to say, how do you prove it? Well, most court cases are one person's word against another. Many court cases, especially those to do with leases, where there is no written lease, are determined on the basis of how you paid rent. If you started paying rent, you wouldn't be paying rent unless there was some type of lease, right? An oral lease will do it. What do I mean by that? Most apartment complexes are going to require that they have something in writing. Most are going to require that you have one of their form leases signed. But don't sit there agreeing with somebody about something. Don't do that. When you're reading through it, when somebody's talking to you, just don't enter into a verbal agreement. That verbal agreement could become binding. You go and take a look at an apartment over the garage of an elderly widower. There's some guy who he's decided that he would like to rent out the apartment over his garage behind his house. So you go over, you take a look at it, it looks great. He turns around to you, he says, I'll rent it to you for a year, $200 a month. Sound good? Sounds good to me. Absolutely, I'll move in next week. We've now got a lease, and that's a lease for a year. Be careful what you agree to. There is nothing wrong with saying to somebody, I'd love to lease these premises from you, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to put it in writing. We'll get a written lease drawn up. And then when we've reviewed it and we're happy with everything, we'll both sign it and then we'll have a lease. Easily done. But don't stand there with somebody, and this typically happens with houses when people are renting houses, is they'll say to somebody, yes, I'm good to go. I'm ready to do that. Or they'll send a letter, or a parent will send a letter, and now the parent has entered into a lease. Okay? So that's something to think about. If it's a lease for less than 3 years, it can be a verbal or oral lease. If the landlord agrees to let you do something that either varies from the lease or is not contained in the lease, get it in writing. Have them write it in there. Perhaps in one of those nice blank spaces that you're looking to have filled up because you don't want to leave blank spaces in the lease, okay? If the landlord says to you, for example, and this is the one that we run into most commonly, a lease will say you're not allowed to have more than 2 cars parked in the drive, and you say, well, we've got 3 we'd like to park in there. Okay, that's fine by me. Can we put it in the lease, please? A more common one is the lease says there shall be no pets, because they're using a form lease. And that lease says there shall be no pets. And you say, well, I've got a cat, I've got a parrot, I've got a pet boa constrictor, whatever the case may be, and I'd like for it to come and live with me. And the landlord says, yeah, that's fine. Make sure it's put into the lease. Because one of the things that can happen is this, is that people later on can disagree. People can later on fall out. And then somebody's looking for a wedge issue to kick you out of the apartment, to kick you out of the house, or to charge you more money, and they turn around and say, what's the dog doing here? Well, you told me my dog could live here. Here's the lease. Lease says no pets. What are you talking about? And then you find yourself, well, you know exactly where you are. You're just there without a paddle. Long-term leases. You see? There we go. All right. There are a number of folks who come here and they say, you know what, I really love this place. Typically this is going to be more with the medical school, the hospital. We have folks who are going into residencies. They found a place right next door. Or we've got folks who find a house that is right across the road from the university. Or they find a place that is up near the football stadium and they say it's money time on home games. This front yard now all of a sudden becomes a parking lot. Okay, so you decided, I want to rent this place for a couple of years. Be very, very, very careful about long-term leases. I can tell you with relative certainty, and I know that Lucia and Wayne can tell you, people change their minds. They go in somewhere the first year and they say, this place is absolutely gorgeous. And one of the things that you find here in Greenville is that every year we have the next best thing. The new apartment complex comes along and they've got a bigger pirate ship in their swimming pool. They've got a wave machine. They've got 20 treadmills and 15 tanning beds. They've got flat screen TVs in every apartment. Their high-speed internet is actually high-speed internet and not snail-pace internet. I see some smiles. I know where some of you are living. Okay, but people want to move. So only sign a long-term lease if you have an acceptable out clause, a clause that will allow you to get out with a certain amount of notice. My advice would be this: don't sign a long-term lease, okay? Unless you're getting absolutely rock bottom rent and you are absolutely certain you're going to be staying somewhere, there's very little that's certain, don't sign a long-term lease. Most of them will renew, and you'll find that many apartment complexes will give you some type of incentive to stay on into the next term. That does happen, okay? If you've signed a long-term lease, you may miss out on some incentives, so be aware of that. Be careful of leases that automatically renew. Now, most leases will actually contain a provision in them where it will automatically renew. So what are you going to do about that? You're going to go into everyone and say, nope, I'm not signing that. Well, no, take a look and flag on your calendar when you've got to give notice, okay? So if you have a lease that runs from November the 2nd this year to November the 2nd next year, make sure that you give notice in time so that come next year it doesn't renew for another year. Typically it'll be 30, 60 or 90 days in advance of the end. You've got to give written notice to the landlord to tell them you're going to get out. Mark that on your calendar. Give yourself a fair warning of when that's going to happen so that you can give that notice. If possible, ask the landlord if they can remove that provision. There is no harm in asking, okay? One of the great things where I chat with people all the time, and I'll say, have you spoken to so-and-so? Have you asked if you can do this? I haven't. Go back, give it a try. There are a lot of people who wind up believing they're going to be in conflict with their landlord, and that belief is simply because they haven't gone in and had a chat already. There are folks who will be willing to work with you. If they want you to sign the lease, and they want you to sign the lease badly enough because you're somebody who's going to be a good tenant for them, there are things that they should be able to do. Be sure that you get a copy of your lease that is signed by you and that is signed by them, okay? So you get a copy of the lease. When all signatures are on it, you get a copy of it. Why? Because if there were any blank spaces, it's going to show that the copy you got at that time had a blank space on and not a thing written in there that said, shall pay $3,000 if a dog stays overnight. And I have seen that before. I've seen leases where they've got these huge penalty clauses written in if a dog or a cat stays overnight. Don't know about you. I've not had a cat that's just showed up for somebody for a night before, but they have had a friend's dog that stayed over. That's the old joke. You know, dogs are fed by humans, and they look at the humans and they think that the human is God. Cats are fed by humans, and they look at the human and think that they're God. So that's just the way things roll. But get a copy of your lease, a signed copy of your lease, all right? Make sure as well, if you've gone in with roommates, that all of their signatures are on the lease as well. Now, there are two types of leases here. The ones that most commonly you're going to sign now, and you know this, is where you rent a room, and that room is around a common area. If that's the case, then you're going to have an individual lease. If you're renting a house or one of the apartments in the older complexes, then all of your signatures are going to go onto the lease. I'm not a big fan of this rent a room. I'm not a huge fan of it, because a lot of those contracts have contained in there that the apartment complex can move people around. Read and make sure and see whether or not that is in the lease that they put in front of you. You don't want to be moving into an apartment where all of a sudden the landlord can come up to you and say, you two are rooming together, sorry, we've got to move you. Or there was a third person who was living with you, tell you what, now we're going to move someone else in. By the way, we're going to do our very best based on the matching sheet that they provided to us, but we're not responsible if they didn't put down on the matching sheet that they like to start bonfires out the back, or they like to smoke the herb every morning. We're not responsible for that. We're just going to move somebody in with you. Be aware of that. Okay? Be aware of whether or not they can move you or move folks to come in with you. Just something to think about. But if you do have roommates who are moving in with you, then please do make sure that the lease that you've got a copy of has everybody's signature on. Why is that going to be important to you? Because if one person doesn't sign, okay, if there are 3 folks who are renting premises and one does not have their name on the lease and damage occurs, guess who the landlord's going to come to first? The 2 people whose names are on the lease. Because typically they've got their security deposit already, okay? Now you can go after that third person yourself if you want to, but the landlord's only going to come after the folks whose names are on the lease. That's typically the way it works, because they have got a security deposit from them, they've probably got a guarantor form, so there's a parent backing it up, and a bank account that they can go after in many, many cases. Make sure everybody's name is listed on the lease. Then we move into the rule of 3. I'm not going to go into that too much because it's a relatively specific Greenville type rule. But suffice it to say, if a landlord comes to you and says, you want 4 or 5 people to live in these premises, tell you what, here's what we're going to do. Only 3 of you put your names on the lease, but we'll have 5 of you live in there. Run a mile. All right? The rule of 3, you cannot have more than 3 unrelated people living together in the same premises. Now, there's a lot of litigation that's going on with regards to that. The enforcement of it is not, it's not really going on a whole heck of a lot. It did happen before. It happens every now and again when folks draw their attention to it. But you don't want to be in one of those situations. You do not want to be in a situation where, for example, the cops show up because there's a noise ordinance violation, and all of a sudden they go, hold on a second, there's 5 people living in here, 2 of you have got to move out. We're going to get code enforcement to come in. Okay? And you especially want to run a mile from any landlord that says to you that you can do something in violation of the law, and they'll just turn a blind eye to it. Because trust me, when the proverbial rolls downhill, they're going to step out of the way of it, and they're going to put you in the firing line. Once a lease has been signed, it's binding, it will be enforced by the courts. Okay, once a lease has been signed, it will be binding. Again, the most common ways that we find that people are able to break a lease are, 1, the landlord agrees to let them out of the lease. So if you are desperate to break a lease, go talk to the landlord. If the landlord will let you out and they'll sign something saying you're out, done. Okay? Number 2, military transfers. There are specific rules with regards to people who are deployed for military purposes. That can allow you to break the lease. 3, victims of domestic violence, where there is a safety plan that says that they need to move out and away from the premises. Under those circumstances, and again, there's some technical details to it, but you can break a lease. Now, a domestic violence protective order can apply to two people who are not in a romantic relationship. You just have to be roommates. Two people, whether of the opposite sex or the same sex, who are living in the same household, if there is violence between them, the victim can get a domestic violence protective order. A lot of people don't know that. I know of some victim advocates who are not aware of that, okay? But if you are a victim of violence from somebody within your household, you may qualify for a domestic violence protective order, and that order and the safety plan that you will hopefully get with it may allow you to get out of the lease. 4, habitability. You haven't got heat, you haven't got water. There are roaches all over the place. There are rats. There is raw sewage. I'm sorry I'm getting graphic, but these are all things that we've seen. If code enforcement comes out and code enforcement says, and a finding is made, I'm going to underline that, a finding is made that the premises are not habitable, lease is over and you're out. That is one that we suggest to people that they look into when they come into our office and they say, where I'm living is just complete squalor, and the landlord will not do anything. The landlord won't do anything. Where I'm living is absolutely horrendous, and I want to move out, and I want to move out now. That is one of the other reasons when a lease can be broken. But apart from that, good luck to you, okay? Apart from that, good luck to you. But again, I go back to the first. Talk to the landlord first and see whether or not they are able to assist you. Changes to a lease that's been signed are only valid if they've been signed by both parties. That means that if a change is made to the lease, if the landlord says, I'm going to drop your rent, if the landlord says, I'm going to give you an extra room, if the landlord says anything that's not in the lease, they want to change it, or you want it changed, both of you have to sign, okay? And the person who signs on their behalf had better be authorized to sign it. So you can't, for example, have one of the maintenance folks who comes round just sign something and take that as a given. They may not be authorized to sign a lease to say that you're going to get half a month's rent free because your air conditioning was out. And at this point, I want to talk to you about that for a second. If a part of your premises are not habitable, so for example, you live in a 4-room apartment and 1 room is not habitable for a month, all right? Can you just withhold rent? Your rent is $800 a month. 1/4 of your apartment is not livable. Can you just pay them $600 for that month? The skeptics in the room. No way. You're absolutely right. You can't. You cannot unilaterally withhold rent. You've got to ask your landlord to do it nicely. And the way you do it nicely is say, you just broke the law. This was in violation of the law. Give me my money. Well, something a little nicer than that. And then if they say no, you've got to take them to small claims court for it, which is a bit of a hassle, but it can be worthwhile. Okay? So there's no self-help in North Carolina. Okay? Your move-in time. Be sure you do a thorough inspection of the premises. Dawn's going to walk you through a move-in checklist in just a couple of minutes, okay? That'll show you we've got a very nice pro forma move-in checklist. The landlord might have one too. You can use ours, you can use theirs. Take oodles of pictures. If they've got a form, use it, but also use your own. The one that we have that I've taken a look at is pretty thorough. Take pictures when you move in. If there is a bloody great stain on the living room carpet, take a picture of that stain. Or else when you move out, it is very likely that the landlord's going to turn around and say, because of that stain, we've got to replace the entire carpet in this apartment. It's only been in this apartment for 2 years, that's going to cost you $1,000. At which point you turn around and say, the stain was there when I got here. And they say, no, it wasn't. Well, it's much easier to then pull out a picture that is date stamped and say, yes, it bloody well was. rather than just stand there with them and say, was, wasn't, was, wasn't, that sort of thing, okay? Much easier. A picture is worth 1,000 words. It beats the hell out of checking a box on a form or writing down there's a stain in the middle of the carpet. Because when you're talking about that, unless you get down and measure it, put down the measurements of the stain, they could say, well, the stain was only that big, now it's this big. Picture, it's taken care of, good to go. Okay? So do a very, very thorough inspection. Take a friend or a parent with you. Okay? Friend is normally better because that's a third party and they're not somebody who's going to be a guarantor typically on your lease. Guarantor being somebody who says, you don't pay, I'm going to pay. So take somebody with you to do the move in. When you are living there, there are late fees that can be imposed. Typically, those are going to be capped by law. That changes. 15% of the rent is the norm, it's the maximum. Landlords will charge you the maximum that they possibly can on a late fee, okay? Repair requests. If you need a repair done, put it in writing. Call them, but also put it in writing, because then you've got it in writing and the date that you sent it to them. Now, these conditions, the landlord has to repair immediately. They can't delay as soon as they've got actual knowledge of it. Unsafe wiring, unsafe flooring or steps, ceilings or roofs, chimneys or flues, lack of potable water. I always love it when I talk to students, I talk about potable water, and I'm like, you mean what I put in my bomb? But no, potable water. Lack of operable locks on all doors leading to the outside. That's a biggie because that's security. They have to repair that immediately. Broken windows, lack of heating, lack of a toilet, bathtub or shower, rat infestation, again beautiful, or excessive standing water. What's missing from that list as we live in the hot, humid south during the summer months? Air conditioning. There's no requirement for air conditioning in North Carolina. Residential Rental Agreements Act is stuck in the 1950s. Okay? Next thing, renter's insurance. And again, Dawn's going to just run through that with you. Get it. Landlord is only going to be liable into the walls. Anything inside the walls. So if a hurricane hits your house, and everything inside gets smashed, the landlord is not liable for that. Place gets flooded, landlord's not liable for that. Unless it was because of their negligence, unless they did something wrong, they are not liable to you. That is a very bitter pill for folks to swallow. Renter's insurance is very cheap. And I strongly recommend that you get renter's insurance. It will cover you, it will give you peace of mind. And if you've got electronic items, computers, TVs, stuff that is going to cost a lot of money to replace, you want to have renter's insurance. Again, it's incredibly cheap to have, and Dawn will chat with you about that. Eviction, make sure that you keep up with your obligations. If the landlord asks you to do something and they're in accordance with the law or the lease, please do it. You don't want to get evicted. That's a judgment that goes against you. It's that way, isn't it? There we go. Security deposits. We want security? Yeah, security deposits. This again is a biggie. There are a lot of places now that are waiving security deposit requirements. Okay? And they're starting to call them different things. They're starting to call them non-refundable fees for different things. That is getting dodgy. Always ask about that. What is this fee? What is this for? Why am I not being charged a security deposit? Why am I being charged a non-refundable cleaning fee instead of a security deposit? I'm going to jump ahead here because the last item on that is that they cannot make deductions for ordinary wear and tear. Okay? Stepping away from the mic for a second. If it's just ordinary wear and tear, if it's just the stuff that happens because you've been living there for a year, they cannot charge that against the security deposit. That's why a number of folks have started going to this non-refundable cleaning fee. Ask about that. Ask if you can pay a security deposit instead. Ask why they're doing that when by law they wouldn't be able to deduct that money from a security deposit. Always be asking questions. Again, there are many landlords who will negotiate with you to get you in the door. and then get it put in the lease. Security deposit must be kept in a trust account. It's your money. It is not their money. It's your money, and it is kept in trust, in safekeeping by them for the term of your lease. They've got to keep it in a separate bank account, okay? They can't put it in their top pocket. They can't put it in their checking account. They can't go put it into their money market account. They've got to put it into a designated account where it is your cash, all right? And at the end of the lease, if there is no damage, if there are no unpaid bills, if there's no unpaid rent, that money belongs to you. And it's got to be returned to you within 30 days at the end of the lease. Now, a couple of things to consider. Either in the lease or in writing within 30 days of the lease being signed, they have got to tell you where that security deposit is being held. If they don't, it is not a security deposit. Go ask for it back. Okay? So if in the lease or within 30 days after the lease is signed, they haven't told you in writing where that money is being held, go ask for it back. They're in violation of the law. At the end of the lease, they can make deductions, okay, for damage. They can make deductions for bills. They can make deductions for unpaid rent. But they've got to return that money to you within 30 days, with one exception, okay? They can get up to 60 days if the damage that you caused was not easily recognizable within those first 30 days. I know that sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but what we're talking about is this, is that on day 29 they do an inspection and then they look and they're like, whoa, looks like somebody's caused some pretty serious damage here. We need to get somebody in to take a look at it. But we're going to run over the 30 days. Well, then they can run over the 30. But typically within 30, you've got to get your cash back, or you've got to get an itemized statement back saying what the money's been used for. Does that make sense? Within 30 days, end of the lease, cash back, or they better have a very, very good excuse for it. Because if they don't give you your money back and you've got to take it to small claims court, you get your attorney's fees paid, which means go hire an attorney, and then they can just present the bill at the end of it to the person who withheld your security deposit. There are actually some teeth to this one. We're moving on. When you leave. Yes. Give your landlord, as we said earlier, written notice of the date that you're going to move out. Make sure that you're doing it in plenty of time so that lease doesn't automatically renew. Put in the notice the address where you can receive the security deposit. You would not believe the number of times that I've heard but I didn't know where you were living, so I couldn't send you your security deposit. Absolute rubbish. Most people have given their forwarding address to the post office, or their parents' address is on the lease, but it's you. So make sure that you give them your moving address. Contact your utility company and tell them that you're moving out. That's another biggie. Are folks who leave the lights on, or they leave an account still in their own name. And somebody moves in the next day and they turn on the lights. They go, wow, that's nice. Somebody's providing electricity for us, and you're still on the tap. Make sure you cut everything off. Everything that you're able to cut off. Obviously, if the landlord is providing cable TV and other stuff, don't be getting in touch with Suddenlink or Time Warner Cable so you can cut it off to this apartment. Because the folks who move in behind you might be a little miffed if they can't watch ESPN Classic. Clean the premises thoroughly. Okay? It is your duty to leave the premises as you found them, or better than you found them if you can. If you moved in and the place was trashed, don't leave it trashed, or you'll likely get charged for it. You get charged astronomical fees. I mean, you're literally going to think that they had a Hollywood A-lister come in to do the cleanup with some of the fees that they're going to charge you for it. Take pictures again. So you've got move-in pictures, and alongside them in your Romery rental album, you have got the move-out pictures, and you can show that there hasn't been a change in condition. When I say pictures, I mean pictures everywhere. Just like the lady earlier who was here with the strobe light. Keep on going. Go into the oven, go into the bathroom, go into the cabinets. Take pictures absolutely everywhere, okay? Take pictures of windows, fly screens. The things that normally you're going to get charged for are problems in the bathroom, refrigerator not properly cleaned out, oven not properly cleaned out, marks on floors, scuffing on the walls, holes that are left in the walls, okay? And by holes, I don't mean little pinholes. I mean, you know, somebody tried to do a Super Bowl impersonation straight into the wall, and there's a big dent there. Turn in your keys. I'm going to repeat that one. Turn in your keys. If you keep your keys, you have held over. You are still the tenant. The person who holds the keys is the tenant. So if you are meant to turn in your keys on November the 2nd and you keep them till November the 3rd, you may have just held over for a month and be liable for 1 month's rent. You may have held over for an entire year and you may owe a whole year's rent. It can get that tricky. So turn in the keys and all copies of keys. The person who keeps the keys is the tenant. All right, that said, Dawn's going to come up and chat with you about renter's insurance and also about the checklist and about mediation. Before she does, any questions, comments, concerns, issues, bored to tears? If you are, I've done my job. Thank you very much.
As Peter said, we do have a very nice checklist tool for you guys to utilize before you move into any kind of apartment. Please, 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 before you sign a lease, get a copy of the lease that you are going to sign. Bring it to our office. We can give you a copy of this wonderful tool for you to use. And then you can go to the actual apartment that you are going to rent, and you can just check off. And it's pretty self-explanatory. It goes room by room, living room, kitchen, dining room, how it was on arrival, departure, and how much it's going to cost to repair the damage if there is any. As Peter said, normal wear and tear does not count. People are very excited when they first get their leases, so they don't think about these things. So bringing the friend, like Peter mentioned, is a very, very smart thing to do. Also the bathrooms. Going to the bathroom, same kind of thing. Bedrooms, other areas, including the heating system, the air conditioning, looking around the room, or looking around outside, looking at the faucets, where you plug in a hose, that kind of thing. The basement, which isn't really an issue here in Pitt County because basements would flood. If there is any furnished property, I know that a lot of places around here now will have currently furnished property, which I think is really very unsanitary, as in the, you must live in one of those places. But look at the coffee table, look at the furniture that's in there already. Make any kind of notes that you have not, that you noticed when you first walk in. Take those pictures. Take as many as you want. Take rolls and rolls just to protect yourself. This tool is a way for you to have some documentation for you as a consumer. And as you begin to lease and begin to buy property and begin to do things as you get onto your education, documentation is going to be a very, very important thing for you to understand. As a paralegal, that's kind of my mantra. So I'll pass this around for you guys to take a look at when we finish up in here. But please, before you sign a lease, come to our office, get a copy of this tool if your leasing agent does not provide you with one. They should, a lot of them do, but if they do not, this is an important thing for you to utilize and to actually make copies of, give them a copy, and you can both sign it during move-in and also during move-out. Okay, renter's insurance. I know renter's insurance is something people don't think about, but it's just like health insurance, it's just like car insurance. Does anyone have renter's insurance currently if you live off campus? No? I didn't have renter's insurance when I was leasing either, so it is a very important thing for you guys to have. And on the North Carolina Department of Insurance website, it has a very thorough guide that you can utilize and you can take a look at before you start to purchase your insurance. And there's 4 major aspects that we would like to go over with. The personal property aspect, that covers pretty much anything in your apartment. Collections that you may have, personal property that could be damaged during a crisis situation. And crisis situations it includes pretty much anything. It ranges from fire, lightning, windstorms, explosions, riots, any kind of civil commotion, even volcano eruptions. Yeah, I know it's kind of silly to think about around here, but in certain areas, yes, very huge in Greenville. Discharge of overflow water and steam. So if your landlord won't cover the hot water breaking, then your renter's insurance would cover anything that could be damaged in your closets or various places that the hot water heater would be stored. Loss of use would include any kind of housing or meals. If you had to move out of your place while it was being repaired, but you would have to save your receipts before your insurance company would reimburse you. Just make sure, again, documentation. Personal liability, if anything were to happen to you while you were renting, renter's insurance would also cover that. But it would cover your defense if someone were hurt in your apartment. It would not cover you or the person in your apartment if it were intentional, however. So if you tried to hurt someone on purpose, that's not going to count, which is pretty self-explanatory, I would think, but that is specified in the renter's insurance guide. And then also medical payments to other people. If they're hurt in your apartment on accident, it will cover that up to $1,000. And just some tips, please inventory your belongings. Make a checklist of everything that you have in your apartment. And a lot of times you don't have, what you have may not cost a lot, but to you it's important. And please make sure that you do have an inventory of that. Give a copy to your rental agent and also keep a copy yourself. Again, take photographs of anything that you find that is important, things that you could be damaged during a hurricane or any kind of situation like that if you had to leave it behind. Ask your agent or insurance company if you're eligible for any kind of discounts. As a student, a lot of times you can get discounts. Even if you're a current or an early alumni, that can also count too. You can lower your insurance premium by increasing your deductible. Keep your coverage current, which sounds just like your car insurance. It's pretty self-explanatory as well. But make sure that you do pay your premiums on time. Don't make late payments. Also pay with a check or money order so you can document as well. And shop around. Some places may give you a more competitive rate that you can afford. There is no grace period for renter's insurance, so again, make sure you keep those receipts. And if you need to, give some to your parents, to your family, so they can also have a copy of them as well. And know the name of the insurance company that you have. Sometimes they change or switch up depending on the best rate. So make sure you keep a copy of your actual insurance policy on file as well. And I also have a copy of this I'm going to give to you guys and put at the table as you walk out. Are there any questions about the rental insurance? Again, it's pretty self-explanatory, and the website is a very good resource for you guys to utilize. And if you do begin to sign leases as you move out of the dorms, what have you, please come to our office and let us look at your lease beforehand. We can give you a copy of this checklist. Any questions? Okay, thank you. And I also have copies of a brochure for our office, which you guys can give to your friends, keep in your wallet, keep on your fridge. There's a little punch-out card in there. After Halloween, I know a lot of people probably have already used theirs or given theirs away, so we have plenty. Thanks.